The 15th of March, 1957, 10:47 a.m. Judge Harold Morrison raised his gavel with absolute confidence. After 30 years on the bench, he'd sentenced hundreds of criminals, murderers, thieves, drug dealers. None of them had ever intimidated him. Today would be different. Ellsworth Johnson, Judge Morrison declared, his voice echoing through the packed Manhattan courtroom. You are a menace to society. A cancer that must be removed from decent civilization. Bumpy Johnson sat calmly in the defendant's chair, wearing a pristine navy suit, hands folded, expression unreadable. He looked more like a businessman than a criminal facing 15 years in federal prison. You have terrorized this city long enough, the judge continued. Your reign of violence ends today. I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that should have ended Bumpy Johnson's story instead. It started the most extraordinary 24 hours in the history of the American justice system, because what Judge Morrison didn't know as he pronounced that sentence was this. By 11 p.m. that same night, he would be sitting in Bumpy Johnson's private office, tears streaming down his face, begging the man he'd just sentenced for help. And what Bumpy did next would prove that sometimes the people who claim to uphold justice are the ones who need it most. To understand how the 15th of March, 1957 became the day the American legal system learned who really held power in New York. You need to understand who Judge Harold Morrison was before he met Bumpy Johnson. Morrison wasn't just any judge. He was Manhattan's most feared federal judge, nicknamed Maximum Morrison for his harsh sentences. He'd sent more men to prison than any judge in New York history. Politicians courted him. The media praised him. Law enforcement worshipped him. But Judge Morrison had a secret that made him the perfect target for the kind of psychological warfare Bumpy Johnson had mastered. Morrison was corrupt. For 5 years, he'd been taking bribes from the Genovese crime family. Not directly, never directly, through his gambling debts at private poker games, through his son's law school tuition mysteriously being paid by anonymous benefactors, through stock tips that always paid off. Morrison told himself he was still a good judge, that his corruption only affected minor cases, that when it came to major criminals like Bumpy Johnson, he was completely impartial. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The 15th of March, 1957, 2:30 p.m., 4 hours after sentencing Bumpy Johnson. Judge Morrison was in his private chambers, reviewing cases for the afternoon session, when his clerk knocked on the door. Your Honor, there is a gentleman here to see you. Says it is about the Johnson case. Morrison looked up. I am not discussing that case with anyone. Johnson's been sentenced. It is over. Sir, he said to give you this. The clerk handed Morrison a manila envelope. No return address. No markings. Just his name written in careful script. Inside was a single photograph. Morrison's blood turned to ice. The photograph showed Morrison shaking hands with Vincent, the chin gigante at a private poker game. In the background, clearly visible, was Anthony, Fat Tony Salerno, counting money. The timestamp on the photo showed it was taken 3 weeks ago. There was no note, no demands, no threats. Just the photograph and the message it represented. Someone knew everything. Morrison's hands shook as he turned the photo over. Written on the back in the same careful script were 5 words, courtesy of Ellsworth Johnson's friends. For 30 years, Judge Morrison had controlled his courtroom with absolute authority. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless. 3:45 p.m., Morrison tried to continue with his afternoon cases, but he couldn't concentrate. Every shadow looked threatening. Every knock on his door made him jump. He'd spent his career sending men to prison. He knew what happened to corrupt judges who got exposed. By 5 p.m., Morrison had made a decision. He would arrange for Bumpy's sentence to be reduced, quietly, through procedural channels. Nobody would ever know why. But at 5:23 p.m., Morrison's world collapsed completely. His secretary buzzed him. Your Honor, your wife is on line 1. She says it is urgent. Morrison picked up the phone. Helen, Harold, there are men outside our house. 3 of them, they've been there for 2 hours. They're not hiding, they want me to see them. Morrison's mouth went dry. What kind of men? The kind you send to prison, Harold. Morrison closed his eyes. The message was clear. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about his family. Helen, I want you to pack a bag. Go to your sister's house. Don't come home until I call you. Harold, what is happening? Just do it, please. Morrison hung up and sat in his chambers, understanding for the first time in his career what it felt like to be truly afraid. 6:15 p.m. Morrison's clerk informed him that his evening plans had been changed. The dinner meeting with the mayor was cancelled. The theatre tickets for that weekend were no longer needed. One by one, the social obligations that defined his life as a respected federal judge were quietly being eliminated. The message was becoming clearer. Judge Morrison's life as he knew it was ending. 7:30 p.m. Morrison received a phone call that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Judge Morrison, this is Detective Sullivan, New York PD. We've received some interesting information about your financial arrangements with certain organized crime figures. Morrison's heart stopped. I don't know what you are talking about. Judge, we have photographs, bank records, witness statements. Unless you'd like to discuss this matter privately, I suggest you make yourself available this evening. The line went dead. Morrison sat in his chambers as darkness fell, understanding that his 30-year career, his reputation, his entire life was crumbling around him. And all of it had started with one decision, trying to sentence Bumpy Johnson. But the worst was yet to come. 8:45 p.m. Morrison's private phone rang. The number only his family and closest associates knew. Judge Morrison. The voice was calm, educated, familiar. Who is this? You sentenced me to 15 years this morning. I thought I should check on how your evening is going. Bumpy Johnson somehow. Some way, the man he'd sent to federal prison was calling his private line. How did you? Judge Morrison, I think we need to talk. Face to face tonight. I am not meeting with you. This is completely inappropriate. Inappropriate. Bumpy laughed softly. Judge, you've been taking money from the Genovese family for 5 years. Your wife is hiding at her sister's house because she is afraid of men you helped put on the streets. The NYPD is building a corruption case against you. And you are worried about what is appropriate. Morrison said nothing. There was nothing to say. Here is what is going to happen, Bumpy continued. You are going to drive to 2247 Lenox Avenue NU, Small's Paradise. You are going to walk upstairs to the private office, and you are going to sit down so we can discuss your future. I am not. Judge Morrison, let me be very clear. Right now, I am the only person in New York City who can solve your problems. The question is whether you are smart enough to accept my help. Morrison's world had become so small, so dark, so hopeless, that the idea of asking help from the man he'd sentenced that morning didn't even seem strange anymore. What time? Morrison asked quietly. You are learning, Judge. Be here in 30 minutes. 11 p.m. Judge Harold Morrison walked up the stairs to Bumpy Johnson's private office above Small's Paradise. It was the longest walk of his life. That morning, he'd been Manhattan's most powerful federal judge. Tonight, he was a desperate man begging for mercy from the criminal he'd tried to destroy. Bumpy was sitting behind his desk, reading the evening paper. He looked up as Morrison entered, gestured to a chair across from him. Judge Morrison, thank you for coming. Morrison sat down, noting that Bumpy didn't stand, didn't offer his hand, didn't show any of the respect usually afforded to federal judges. You have me at a disadvantage, Morrison said. Yes, I do. The question is what we're going to do about it. Bumpy set down the newspaper. Judge, you sentenced me this morning without knowing the first thing about who I really am or what I am capable of. You thought you were dealing with a street thug who'd made some money and gotten too big for his britches. Morrison said nothing. But I am not a street thug, Judge. I am a businessman. I understand leverage, negotiation, and mutual benefit. And right now, you need to understand something. I can destroy you completely, or I can save you completely, your choice. What do you want? What I want is respect. What I want is to be treated like the intelligent businessman I am, instead of the stereotype you see when you look at me. What I want is for the legal system to work the way it is supposed to work. Morrison was confused. I don't understand. Judge, I am not asking you to let me go free. I am asking you to give me a fair sentence based on the actual evidence instead of your prejudice about who you think I am. Bumpy pulled out a file folder. Here is what is going to happen. You are going to review my case properly. You are going to look at the evidence objectively. And you are going to realize that 15 years for bookmaking and numbers running is excessive, vindictive, and probably unconstitutional. He slid the folder across the desk. Inside, you'll find legal precedents, sentencing guidelines, and a very reasonable motion for reconsideration. You'll also find a complete record of your financial dealings with the Genovese family. Morrison's hand shook as he opened the folder. Here is the deal, Judge. You reduce my sentence to something reasonable. Say 2 years, and all evidence of your corruption disappears forever. Your wife comes home safely. Your career continues. Your reputation remains intact. And if you refuse, by tomorrow morning every newspaper in New York will have copies of those photographs. The FBI will have copies of your bank records. Your wife will receive a visit from some very unpleasant people. And you'll spend the rest of your life wishing you'd made a different choice tonight. Morrison looked at the evidence in the folder. Everything was there. 5 years of corruption documented with the precision of a federal investigation. How did you, Judge Morrison? I didn't get this far by underestimating my enemies. When you decided to make an example of me, I decided to learn everything about you. The question is, are you smart enough to turn an enemy into an ally? Morrison sat in that chair for 10 minutes, looking through evidence that could end his life, offered by the man whose life he tried to end that morning. Finally, he looked up. What guarantee do I have that you'll honor this agreement? Bumpy smiled. Judge, I am a businessman. My word is my reputation, and my reputation is my business. If I wanted to destroy you, you'd already be destroyed. If I wanted you dead, you'd already be dead. What I want is cooperation. 2 years. 2 years, minimum security, preferably federal prison in New York, so I can maintain my business interests. You'll present it as a compassionate sentence based on my age and community contributions. Morrison knew he had no choice, but as he looked across the desk at Bumpy Johnson, he realized something that shocked him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. For the first time in years, he was being asked to give a sentence based on justice rather than politics, prejudice, or corruption. There is one more thing, Bumpy said. What? From now on, when black defendants come before your court, you are going to give them the same fair consideration you give white defendants. Not because I am threatening you, but because it is right. Judge Morrison looked at the man he'd tried to sentence to 15 years and realized he was being offered something he'd lost years ago, the chance to be the judge he'd always claimed to be. Agreed, Morrison said. They shook hands, not as criminal and judge, but as two men who understood power, respect, and what it meant to keep your word. The 16th of March, 1957, 9:30 a.m. Judge Morrison called a hearing to reconsider Bumpy Johnson's sentence. He cited new evidence, legal precedents, and constitutional concerns about excessive punishment. He reduced Bumpy's sentence to 2 years, minimum security with eligibility for early release for good behavior. The media praised Morrison's wisdom and judicial temperament. Legal scholars called it a model of constitutional fairness. Bumpy Johnson served 18 months and walked out of federal prison with his organization intact and his reputation enhanced. But the real change wasn't in Bumpy's sentence, it was in Judge Morrison himself. For the remaining 12 years of his career, Judge Morrison became known for his fair treatment of minority defendants. He reformed sentencing guidelines. He established legal aid programs for indigent defendants. He became the kind of judge he'd always claimed to be but never actually been. When Judge Morrison retired in 1969, the black community held a dinner in his honor. Bumpy Johnson, now legitimately successful and respected, was the guest speaker. "Judge Morrison taught me something important," Bumpy told the crowd. "Sometimes the people who seem like your enemies are just people who haven't learned to see you clearly yet. And sometimes the best way to change the system isn't to destroy it, but to help it live up to its own promises." Judge Morrison died in 1975. At his funeral, one of the largest floral arrangements came with a simple card: "In memory of a judge who learned that justice isn't about power, it is about fairness. E. Johnson, the 15th of March, 1957, the day a federal judge tried to end Bumpy Johnson's story and learned that sometimes the people you try to destroy are the only ones who can save you. And sometimes the most radical thing you can do is ask your enemy to help you become the person you always claimed to be."